School districts are kind of pulling back the curtain on their plans for this round of remote learning. In fact, Portland Public Schools is talking to us and answering your questions tonight. You'll hear that in a bit. But first, parents, we do want to reiterate, we want to hear from you. We are looking for more parents to talk to about this latest pivot to Zoom schooling, if you will. So email the story at kgw.com and tell us your family's story, including, whether your kids are at school in person. Are they remote learning again? How are they doing with that? What are you hearing from the school? And tell us which district you're in. We plan to keep airing your stories and keep getting answers about your schools and their plans for your kids. Speaking of, here is tonight's big story, courtesy of Christine Pitawanich.
We got a chance to sit down with Jonathan Garcia. He's the chief of staff for Portland Public Schools. We decided to use the time we had to get right to addressing questions from teachers and parents.
The biggest question that we keep getting from teachers and parents is really, what is the threshold for moving a school from in-person to distance learning?
So we are looking at staff who are testing positive or who are sharing with us that they have a close contact. We are measuring and keeping into account how many vacancies compared to how many subs we're able to bring in, right?
Jonathan Garcia, chief of staff at Portland Public Schools, says he's on a team that meets 5 times a day, tasked with reviewing all the data. They start meeting every morning at 6:30 to look at the numbers.
So, for example, today, there are 391 educator jobs that were requested, and 160 of those were not filled by substitute.
But he says raw numbers aren't the only point of reference. He gave an example, citing a small Portland high school on the brink of closing that had only half of its students showing up. School administrators there said they felt they were able to make some changes and remain open, so they did.
It's a complex decision-making process.
Garcia says data indicated almost 1 in 4 students did not show up to class on Monday, district-wide. Some teachers say there are reports of 4 or 5 students in some classrooms. That leaves parents and teachers wondering when or if the district will consider moving entirely to remote.
I hear our families and I hear our educators wanting a clear metric or a clear threshold, but it's not. I don't think that's. It's not that simple. Knowing, again, our premise is to keep schools open.
It's just we don't know what's going to come next.
That's Nicole Safronic, a teacher at McDaniel High, one of the schools now in remote learning. Safronic had a question as well about coming back to in-person learning.
What is the plan? What is your idea to solve this problem and to not just end up right back with not enough staff to keep schools open again?
For the majority of staff, folks are not showing up to work because they're sick.
Garcia says the district is meeting with public health officials and expects the peak of Omicron infections to be in late January, after which it's possible those who were out sick would be back to work.
Another Portland parent asked, are the sub shortages affecting certain schools more than others? Is the district prioritizing having subs at one school over another?
The substitutes themselves make a decision on where they want to sub for the day, right? And so I don't think the system has the ability to deploy substitutes in that in a systemic fashion as much as we would want to.
Okay, Christine Pitawanich joining us now. So Christine, this is obviously a really complex topic. And as we saw in your story and as we've seen in our own inbox, there are just so many questions out there right now.
Right, everything is just so fluid. And when I spoke with PPS at noon earlier today, they told me that there were 3 schools that they were closely monitoring because they might be on the brink of closing, but they wouldn't tell me which schools because these days, right now, information changes so rapidly.
Yeah, we've seen that definitely recently several times. Any other questions that you saw that really stood out to you from parents?
I did get a couple of questions from parents about special education. They were wondering how the district is making sure those special education students are getting the education they're supposed to be receiving. And the district tells me they're doing what they did back in hybrid, making sure that students have devices, that they can meet one-on-one or in small groups with their special education teacher. They also tell me they've got limited in-person opportunities for some special education students who need a little little extra help in learning how to access their remote learning. I'd say another question that I heard from parents was one about mental health resources for students. I know we've heard a lot about the psychological impacts of the pandemic and acting out in schools, that sort of thing. PPS has a web page with all that information. We plan to post a link to it once we put our story up on the KGW website.
All right, Christine, as you know, that'll be so helpful for students and for parents to know about and to use those resources. Christine Pinewood with the information for us. Thank you so much.